Hi everybody, it's Courtney and I'm here with another video for Trinity Stamps. Today I'm going to be creating another card with the Spring Fling Florals stamp set, and I showed you the Happy Sentimini stamp set, but I didn't end up using that. So I have a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock here, and this is cut down to 5.5 by 4.25, and I have a few of the images from the stamp set. I'm not using all of them, but what I want to do is I want to create a border around my card panel here. This will eventually be a shaker card. So I'm going to start off with that large image, mask that out, and then I'll continue to stamp the rest of the images, masking those out each time I go. So I'm going to speed this up in just a minute, but I did keep all of the stamping and masking in here so you can kind of see the process. Now in the beginning here, I did mess up. Well, I didn't necessarily mess up, but I wasted a little bit of time by continuing to stamp my flowers, forgetting about the fact that I wanted to add some leaves. So you'll see at the end, I will go ahead and go back to this particular area and mask out these flowers that I had stamped out in order to add some leaves. So I'm going to move my masks around as I go. So I only cut out one mask for each one of the flowers and actually the leaves too, but I only ended up needing to use a mask for a leaf just one time because I was being lazy. You can certainly cut out multiple masks for the images that you plan on using, or you can use more images and just continue to have just one mask for each of the images. But I figured I wanted to keep to kind of the same color scheme, so I figured only 4 flowers and 2 of the leaves would work out well. So you can see as I'm stamping along, I am just moving those masks, making sure that they are masked before you stamp out your next image, whether it be a flower or a leaf. I've made that mistake more than once where I forget to mask something and then I stamp directly over it. And unfortunately, there's really no way to fix that. So you'll just want to make sure that each and every time you stamp, you're moving your mask around. The more times you stamp over your masks, the more difficult it will become to line up. I'm using Simon Says stamp masking paper because it is super tacky, so I didn't lose the stick. No matter how many times I moved it, I still had a good stick to it. But you kind of stamp over it, so you have some black lines that weren't there before. So intricate images like this become a little bit harder to line up by using, a specific area of that image. I typically look for one petal that kind of stands out from the rest in order to line up the image, but the more times you stamp over that mask, the harder it becomes, but it's still manageable. The masking does not have to be perfect. I'm not doing any ink blending in the background or anything like that, so I'm not too concerned with my masking being absolutely perfect. So once I reached the other end of my card panel here, I'm going to go ahead and mask out these bottom flowers again so that I can stamp a leaf there, being I forgot the first time. So once that's done, I am going to trim down my panel just a little bit on the one side and just the bottom where I had a little bit of a gap between the edge of the card panel and the images itself. Now I'm not going to show you all of the coloring, but I am only using a 2-color blend here, and I just wanted to show you guys that you can get really good results with this. Because these images do have a lot of detail to them, I should say, you don't really have to be perfect with your coloring. So whenever I use only 2 colors, I am using 2 colors that are far enough apart that I'm still going to get some contrast. And if I don't, like this particular flower, I went right in with my darkest color just to add some shading to the base of the leaves. Now I'm going in with my lightest color and realized that blended out my darkest color just a little bit too much. So I'm going to go back in with my darkest color and just add a few little flicks on each of those petals in the very darkest areas and just get a little bit more contrast there. Now I'm skipping the centers of the flowers for now. I'm going to go ahead and go back to those. I'm just going to color those in solid. Like I said, we're going to keep the coloring very simple on these. Now for the next flower, I am using also a 2-color blend, again starting off right with my darkest color, and I'm just going to add shading, and here's where I dropped my marker. Panicked for a moment, but I just used my lightest color on that first flower to remove that. So I'm just adding shading to the center of the flower where the petals, or the base of the petals, I guess you could say, and a little bit where one petal is laying over another. I'm not really too concerned with all of the shadows that these would be creating, where one flower is underneath another, or the leaf is underneath the flower, or one petal is underneath a petal. I'm not too concerned, just as long as I have a little bit of contrast. Moving on to the next flower here, doing that same thing, going in with my darkest color first and then blending that out with the lightest color. In this case, I am coloring the center of the flower the same as the petals and those little, I don't know whether they're stamen, but I guess they're other petals. I'm going to leave for the same color as I color the center of all of them. Next, moving on to the next combination here, I wasn't getting enough contrast here at all. So I ended up bringing in just a little bit of a darker color for the base of the petals, and I liked that much more. You can see I don't have a ton of contrast here, but I definitely have a little bit, even just using two of the colors. So for the leaves, I'm going to do the same thing, just using two color combination here. For this particular leaf, I am adding a little bit of a shadow where it's folded over on itself. And then I'm just going to add some shading to the base of the leaf as well as the tip of the leaf to make it look as if it has some shape. And then going over that with the G24 as my lightest color. For this little set of leaves here, I'm going to switch over to some YG markers, again going in right with my darkest color and then blending that out with the lightest color. And you can see that I skipped one. I'm using the YG97 and YG93, skipping that YG95 that would normally come next, just so that I can get some contrast. Going to color the center of the flowers with the Y35, and I'm just coloring these in solid, not worrying about doing any shading at all. So I use the same color combinations for all of the flowers and leaves for the entire card. And now I want to cut out the center. So I'm going to take my craft knife here just to cut a slit right in the center so that I have somewhere to start. You can definitely do this entire thing with a craft knife, but I feel more comfortable having my scissors. So this takes a little bit of time, and I'm not too concerned with my fussy cutting being absolutely perfect. When you first start out, it's a little bit more difficult because you have a whole lot of paper there. But as you continue to go around the middle of the card panel, it becomes a little bit easier because you have a little bit more bend, I guess you could say, with the card panel itself. I'm working on little tiny sections at a time, kind of twisting and turning my paper as I go along. Normally I kind of go in the same direction the entire time, but in this particular case I have so many little crevices that I need to get into. It was just easier to kind of cut little tiny sections at a time, continuing to turn my paper in every single direction, whatever was easiest to get this cut. Now I do have a white border around my images, and some of it is not perfect. Some of those lines are just a little bit more jagged rather than a little bit more round. But again, I'm not too concerned with this. I think once everything was put together as far as the whole card in itself, you're not going to be able to tell these little areas were not perfect. So like I said, I went around that entire card panel and fussy cut that entire middle out. Again, not too concerned, but it does get easier as you go because it gets a little bit more flimsy. So once all of my fussy cutting was down, I'm going to go ahead and adhere my acetate to the back of my card panel. And I have the acetate that is already pre-cut to an A2 size card already. So my panel is a little bit smaller than that. So I'll end up having to trim some of that off. It's easier to line up when the acetate is a little bit bigger for me anyway. I'm using Ranger Multi-Matte Medium because this will give me a couple of seconds to move things around if needed, and it dries clear and obviously matte. So I like that. I prefer to use wet glue over, like a tape runner or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and lay down my acetate, and I did let this dry for just a couple of minutes before I trimmed off the excess edges there, and I did end up having to trim just a little bit more of my card panel just to make sure that everything was straight, but again, not too concerned with it. So next, once that glue was completely dry, I am going to go ahead and take some Scotch foam tape, and I cut these into smaller strips. So I cut the Scotch foam tape in half right down the center, and I was able to kind of frame in my card panel, and then I had to cut a whole lot of pieces of the foam tape to fit all of those leaves and those flowers that are kind of sticking out. I wanted everything to be covered so that I don't have to add too many sequins and they don't get lost. So once all of my panel was covered with this Scotch foam tape, I'm going to use some embellishments, and I'll link all of these below, but I kind of just kept with the color scheme of the colors that I colored the flowers and added some white ones in there too, and these are all by Trinity, so I'll link those below. You can add as many or as little as you want. I didn't need to add a whole lot because quite honestly, once all of my images were cut out, I guess you could say, there wasn't a whole lot of room for the shaker itself. So next I'm going to go ahead and remove the foam tape here, and I'm going to be super careful with this. So you want to make sure that you're holding down your panel in an area where you're not really touching the sequins because they'll just stick to you, so that when you're peeling off the backing, it doesn't go flying. I've had sequins all over my craft room when doing this, so you just want to make sure that you're holding that down tight when removing the backing. Once that was done, I'm going to take a white A2 size note card and place that directly over my panel there, making sure that all of my areas were stuck down before flipping that over. Next, I'm going to bring in the Hello Sentimenty stamp set. Instead of the Happy, I went ahead and die cut the word as well as the outline, and I wasn't sure exactly what colors I wanted for this, so I cut them out of white and black and figured the white kind of got lost. So I'm going to end up coloring in this white hello, and you can obviously make these any color you want, whether or not you have the correct color cardstock or not. I'm just taking a Copic marker here that matches my flowers, and I'm just going to color in my word. Then I am going to take some Tombow Mono multi glue to go ahead and adhere my word down to that black shadow. Like I said, I prefer to use wet glue just because it gives me a couple of seconds to kind of move things around. I don't necessarily line things up the right way the first time, but you can use like a double-sided adhesive here, like a Stick It or something like that, if you're more confident than I am. So once that was done, I just left a little bit of a shadow off to the left-hand side with that black cardstock that we had cut. And I'm going to use that same wet glue to go ahead and adhere that to the back of that shadow piece and adhere that right to the middle of my little shaker card here. But that is it. That is the card for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Trinity channel. Have a great day, guys. Bye.